Libres de Droit, a podcast created by the Alliance of Lawyers for Human Rights. Founded in 2009, the Alliance of Lawyers for Human Rights creates a unique link between nearly 200 human rights protection organizations and more than 26,000 lawyers committed to their defense.
Welcome to this episode of Libres de Droit, a podcast created to shed light on loopholes in the law, on individual initiatives that are making a difference, and to reflect on new ways of action for the future. We will conduct this reflection together by having a partner NGO and a lawyer member of the Alliance, intervening in each episode around a common theme.
This episode will be dedicated to the practice of pro bono. What is pro bono? What is the future of pro bono in France and in Europe? How is pro bono structured?
To answer these questions, we will give the floor to Mrs. Özgür Kahale, Pro Bono Director of Europe at DLA Piper, and Mrs. Giulia Patane, consultant at PILnet, an NGO that aims to claim and remaining the rule of the law so that it works for the benefit of all.
Bonne écoute!
Hello, Giulia. Thanks for being here with us today. At first, could you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. Hello, it's a pleasure for me to be here. My name is Giulia Patane. I'm a human rights consultant with a Juris Doctor, and I gained that in Italy in 2010. And then I received a Master of Human Rights from Mahidol University in Thailand in 2013. And I currently live in Italy, where I'm from, and where I consult for different organizations, the main one being PILnet.
So PILnet is working on pro bono, and we observed that the pro bono trend is relatively young in France, and it's still difficult to understand it because there are so many forms of pro bono that can be used and are set up by the firms. What does pro bono consist of precisely in the legal field?
All right, so let's start perhaps with a short definition of pro bono. So pro bono comes from the Latin phrase pro bono publico, it stands for the public good. And essentially can be defined as the provision for free legal service to those in need, but otherwise without access to those services. So it's a voluntary and uncompensated legal work done by lawyers for the public good rather than for commercial interest, and free for the clients. And it should be delivered with the same professional standard as paid legal work. It's different from the state-funded legal aid on several levels. For example, where legal aid is legal advice and representation paid for by the state, pro bono comes in the picture where no legal aid is available or legal aid is ineffective. And so it covers also assistance that legal aid does not. So, for example, it covers legal research or capacity building and workshop. And it covers also assistance not only for individual, but also for organizations, which legal aid does not. So we can say that pro bono, in a way, fills the gap that are left by legal aid. Now, pro bono, as we know it now, it's relatively new. As you said, is emerging relatively recently in Europe. But actually, the tradition of pro bono really comes from back in the medieval time. And there is actually a great publication, a great research done precisely on this, published by DLA and PILnet, written by Lamin Kadar, who now is with Dentons. Well, Lamin identified actually the beginning of pro bono in Europe, in medieval Europe, where free legal assistance was considered as a charitable duty, and it was done by the church or by lawyers. And then the movement of legal lawyers, legal professionals that wanted to tap these unmet legal needs started. And they tackled it so well that, the creation of legal aid, state-funded legal aid, was born, and it was really the norm by the 20th century. And at that point, it was considered an obligation of the state. So in a way, pro bono as a voluntarism really declined a bit because the state legal aid emerged and was strong enough. It's only later in the 90s, just a couple of decades ago, with the emerging of those big law firms, especially from the US and the UK, that pro bono started to emerge again also in Europe as we know it now. And so it's with these mega multinational firms from the US and UK that created the condition for this now more institutionalized practice of pro bono and the creation of pro bono programs, the existence of pro bono coordinators as we know it now, and is overgrowing in Europe. There are still a few dilemmas of whether pro bono would be best placed just to serve NGO clients or individual, or whether it should address access to justice, or they should tap on the specialization of lawyers. But definitely a trend that I am witnessing is the creation of more and more long-term partnerships between law firms and NGO, which is shaping, right, the movement of pro bono. Is not as the old model, and perhaps we talk about that later, of the clearinghouse helping the law firms, matching them with pro bono requests, but it's a new trend. These law firms independently creating their own pro bono programs with NGO, and the model normally include also a lot of capacity buildings from the side of the NGO for the pro bono lawyers, which most of the time would pay the NGO to compensate this time that they spend to train their lawyers. So a lot is changing, a lot is growing, and there are more and more new trends that are coming up, and it's really great to witness all of this.
Thank you, Giulia. It's really interesting, and we see that the pro bono is evolving in Europe and in the world. And you talk a bit about it, but how is the practice articulated between the different actors, the law firms, the clearinghouses, the program, etc.?
So if you think about these big law firms and their thousands of lawyers and clients, you can imagine that despite the strong desire to be able to give back to society via pro bono, their time is quite limited to find those cases and find those individual or NGO that would need pro bono legal assistance. So they might not have the time even, for example, to see the trends in the society, to look at the unmet legal needs in a society at a larger scale. And so this is where pro bono clearinghouses play really a significant role. Essentially, pro bono clearinghouse identified pro bono clients for the firms and act as intermediary, as matchmaking actors. So on the one hand, they help the NGO or the individual client to better frame their legal needs, to better frame their legal requests, and present a legal project. And then on the other, they would introduce this project, this client and this NGO to the law firms. There are many different models to this practice. There are clearinghouses that would enact the so-called model pay to play, so that law firms would pay the clearinghouse to receive pro bono requests, and it could be done on a monthly basis, on a regular basis, via platform. Now the trends are very, very different and variegated. And this is the model of trust law, for example. You would pay a fee, a membership fee, and then you would receive pro bono requests for assistance, mainly from NGO. And then there are other clearinghouses that would circulate matters to whoever would subscribe to their mailing list or their platform. For example, the PILnet clearinghouse. PILnet has actually 4 clearinghouses: the global clearinghouse that would cover all the globe, the Eurasia clearinghouse for Russian-speaking and Eurasian countries, the Hungarian one, and the Asia clearinghouse. There's also, as I said, this emerging trend for law firms not to rely so much on clearinghouse anymore, so creating their own program, especially with this emerging new profession of the pro bono professional. And I also want to mention a trend that is quite interesting in Asia, of law firms having their own clearinghouse themselves. So they create their own foundation, which is a clearinghouse, and so they would broker their own pro bono requests. This is a quite interesting model that we saw, especially in South Korea.
You mentioned a lot of different actors, especially clearinghouses, but you didn't mention the companies. Is that one of the future actors of pro bono?
Actually, yes, this is another new emerging trend. Thanks for bringing that up, because companies, especially if they are clients of law firms, they're becoming more and more another actor in this landscape. So let's talk first about, in-house lawyers as just as a separate within a company. There's this emerging trend of in-house lawyers wanting to do more, even if they're not part of the big corporation law firm, big corporate law firm, and which would have pro bono programs within their firms, but from a company that is absolutely not related to a legal field, let's say Microsoft or other, they would have their in-house lawyers that would be very eager to do pro bono and put their skills at the service of pro bono clients. And more, we also see the first example that I mentioned, the fact that pro bono law firms would want to create collaborations, pro bono collaboration with their clients. So if a law firm has a big company as a client, they would want to work with their in-house lawyers on pro bono projects. And this is quite interesting. And this is also where pro bono clearinghouse can really help, because given that they have the vision of the needs of, NGO that might need to do a big research that is multinational or comparative in its core, they would know perhaps that this law firm has offices in X, Y, and Z, and that company has office in the other jurisdiction that was needed. They can really help in creating the cooperation between the company and the law firms, or when it comes to the law firms, introducing the clients as a potential partner for this collaboration can also be broker as such. At PILnet, we normally, when we circulate our requests and those are suitable for in-house collaboration, we would have a tag that says this project is suitable for collaboration with in-house lawyers.
Thank you, Giulia. You talk a bit about the trend in Asia. You moved to Asia in 2012 to design and implement NGOs and academic projects, focusing especially on access to justice for victims of human trafficking. Can you tell us about that? And did it influence your vision of pro bono?
Yes, definitely. So my years in Asia definitely shaped my career and myself incredibly. I moved to develop a research that was looking precisely at the protection of child victims of commercial sexual exploitations in the criminal justice system in Thailand. So that was the focus of my research and was the basis of my thesis for the Master in Human Rights that I undertook in Thailand. And that research was so critical and so needed that we decided to expand and cover also other, jurisdictions in Southeast Asia. And back then, I really didn't know anything about pro bono, to be honest. That's where I just moved out from the usual legal career in Italy. I wasn't satisfied at all with becoming just a lawyer or even a prosecutor, as I've tried and attempted that career too. It wasn't satisfying that I moved to Asia to do specifically this research, because it was really dear to my heart as a theme, as a topic. And that's where my career just took diverse directions. And then the legal part, the pro bono element came back a couple of years later when I moved to Hong Kong. But yes, back at the time of the research, I didn't know anything about pro bono, but that experience in the field really shaped the way I now work with law firms and the way I now think about pro bono lawyers, their potential, their limitation, and what I think it's needed to develop specific projects, especially when it comes to sensitive clients like children, like victims of trafficking, like migrants, like really like vulnerable population, which really have specific needs that need to be addressed differently when it comes to pro bono project and pro bono program.
You led the PILnet's anti-trafficking in persons project. So you mentioned the beginning of that work in Southeast Asia. And this project was covering 5 jurisdictions in the region. Can you tell us about this, how it worked, and what you did basically in that context?
Yeah, this is quite exciting because this is really where my background in law, from my Juris Doctor and then my work with the NGO, came together. So I moved to Hong Kong and I joined PILnet's Hong Kong office in 2018, precisely to lead the anti-trafficking in person project. And the project was, as you said, covering 5 jurisdictions, very diverse jurisdictions. It was Hong Kong with a very well-developed compared to the other pro bono programs. Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, and Vietnam. And the aim of this project was to create a specialized anti-trafficking clearinghouse that would allow NGO and their clients or victims of trafficking to access pro bono legal support and essentially access justice. So with this in mind, we developed the project in different phases. At the beginning, we did a big legal needs assessment, really talking to the NGO on the ground and understand what actually their legal needs are, and understanding that perhaps their even operational needs of a frontline anti-trafficking NGO might be different from operational needs of organizations that don't work in this field. After this legal needs assessment, it was essentially understanding the needs and build the network of NGO, right? So on the one hand, you build the network of NGO that would need the final product and you understand their needs. And then we started to work on the legal profession. So we started to engage with law firms, with individual lawyers, with small law firms, middle-sized law firms, big corporate law firms that has offices in these countries, and really pitch essentially this project to them, try to make them understand how essential and crucial their role would be. There was a lot of reluctance because most of them would think that they may not bring anything to the table because the assistance of victims of trafficking is so complex and requires such a specialized assistance. And we were ready for that because we already included in the project a heavy capacity building component for the lawyers. So the project included a very fragmentalized and multiple module of training for them, covering international legislation on anti-trafficking, national legislation, but also a lot of those soft skills that are needed for lawyers to be aware of and learn before approaching and before starting to work with sensitive clients and victims of trafficking. So this was the second phase, really working on building the capacity of the lawyers. And then the third phase was more about building the relationship between these two players, because if the lawyers on the one hand were a little bit reluctant to work on this because they thought they might not be ready, on the other hand, there was a lot of lack of trust from the side of the NGOs on these big, far away lawyers that they might think they're not so approachable, they're not so easy to work with. So we did a lot of relationship building activities through roundtable, through simulation, to working together, really to build the trust with one another. And then we finally started to launch the clearinghouse. Now, we realized that despite the intensive capacity building effort, those trainings were still not enough for lawyers to feel confident enough or even to be realistically ready to assist victims of trafficking. So we created what we call the est-il team approach. So whenever within our clearinghouse, anti-trafficking clearinghouse, which is still active under the Asia clearinghouse at the moment, whenever a case would come to the clearinghouse that was related to an individual client, so a victim of trafficking, we would activate this est-il team, which is essentially the creation of a team around the client, which was comprised of the client himself in a very victim-centered approach, the NGO. So we would never receive case directly by individual, but it's always an NGO that introduce their own clients. And this is crucial because we need to be sure that the psychosocial needs of the clients are met and they're taken care of, and that the lawyers can refer if they have any red flag to the NGO what's happening. So there's the client, there's the NGO, there's the pro bono team. So normally a partner and a couple of associate and a volunteer. So a bigger team, so that when it comes to lack of time, rotation, handover, there's still someone familiar. And 2 experts. So there would be 1 expert on anti-trafficking legislation in general, and 1 expert in the local context, because of course we have, Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, Hong Kong, everyone has a different, so we would have a local expert. And this approach really seems to be working much better in making the pro bono team feeling comfortable enough that they can take, in fact, a case because they have the assistance of the expert. They can go back to them, ask questions, and they feel empowered to that. And for the NGO to feel that they can access to these big law firms and they can protect their client with big tools on their hands. So this is the evolution of the anti-trafficking projects from beginning to end. Of course, this was shaped very differently in each jurisdiction because the pro bono culture, the landscape, and many different aspects were very different in these jurisdictions. So I would say that perhaps in Hong Kong and in Thailand, it's where this was more successful. In countries, contexts like Cambodia or in Vietnam as well, very successful because the pro bono culture is already a bit more advanced than in the other, and there's a more vibrant civil society movement. While in Cambodia and Myanmar, the legal profession is still not so familiar with pro bono. There are many deeply rooted structural problems in terms of corruptions and really lack of trust in the legal profession because of reasons that made the implementation of the project much harder. We did all the phases in every jurisdiction, but of course, the impact might have been different in each jurisdiction. But nevertheless, the ATIP Clearinghouse is still a sub-chapter of the Asia Clearinghouse at PILnet, and we keep receiving requests, especially NGO requests. But whenever it comes to individual requests, we activate again the ATIP team approach, and that's where we're going, how we're going on now.
Thank you. It's really interesting to hear about it. And as you explained, PILnet connects organization with high-quality legal services to protect vulnerable individuals and communities around the world. What exactly is the role playing by PILnet in pro bono? And as well as you start to talk about it, what are the limitations of such organization and of the pro bono?
So really, PILnet's role and PILnet's strength is being a convener and a connector on the ground. And the fact that we spent, as I said, for example, with the anti-trafficking project, so much time in building that relationship with the NGO on the ground and with the local lawyers really put us as a key player when it comes to connecting the dot and connect organization, individuals, and players when a need emerge. We have the vision of knowing what are the needs of the NGO, knowing what are the strength and the limitation of the law firms, their needs, their worries, and we can work around that to build pro bono projects, pro bono programs, pro bono matters. For example, many big law firms might already have big impactful projects that are doable because they have a global presence. But most of the time, they would have international lawyers in those exotic offices, right? They might have UK lawyers or American lawyers in Hanoi, let's say. But when it comes to a needs for assistance of a client, you need the local lawyers. You cannot expect, the international lawyers to have a specific interactions or especially a sensitive interaction with the client in the local language. So the fact that we've been able to build relationship also with individual lawyers or small law firms and local law firms really added that value to bring together the big law firms and the small one to create this really effective collaboration with the power and the strength and the visibility of the international law firms and the cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity, and basic language needs of the local lawyer. When it comes to limitation, probably one already emerged. So the cultural and linguistical limitation of big law firms present in especially countries that are not native English speakers, but also, and again, I touched a bit within the ATIP project descriptions, the fact that quite often in big law firms, the specialization of lawyers would be tax law or commercial law or contracts law, that these are not tasks that would necessarily be applicable to certain cases. Those are extremely helpful when it comes to operational needs. So if we have requests from an NGO to review a contract, to review a TOR, to draft a non-disclosure agreement. They are excellent for this kind of project. And these are clearinghouse matters that can be placed very quickly and can really help the NGO to focus on their operation, focus on their programs, and not having to spend a day in drafting this roughly badly shaped agreement. So these are their strengths. But on the other hand, if we want to apply and use and have these lawyers help in field like individual assistant, that's where these come as a limitation. But that's also where organizations like PILnet, like Kind, like many others in this field would work on filling those gaps. Okay, we have tax lawyers. Let's still use these tax lawyers, which has this great brain and big heart, fill the gap, the knowledge gap, with an intensive training or a mentoring program or supervisions that would enable him to be able to work in a field that is out of his comfort zone, but still very fulfilling for them. Another limitation might be time constraint. And this is where working in team at the firm might be preferable than assigning a matter to just one person that might end up being overwhelmed with work or might end up being moved to another office and leaving that space empty. And I think these were all the limitations that came to my mind.
In your experience, why would you say the lawyers are actually doing pro bono work?
There are multiple reasons. If we think just about in a very practical, pragmatic way, this institutionalization of pro bono made so that in big law firms, lawyers have to do a certain amount of pro bono hours. So there's a number of lawyers that would do that just because their firm is asking to do that. And those are the lawyers that would normally just take the simple one-off matters that it's easy enough for them to carry it out and to tick the box of the filling of the pro bono hours, right? So we cannot deny that there's this portion of lawyers that would do that. And the reason why the law firm is imposing those hours of pro bono is also another big, chapter of this conversation. We might not want to go there, but there's also an element of visibility of doing pro bono. So there's this portion, but there's I would say a larger portion of lawyers that really do that to make the difference, to change and work on something that is so much more fulfilling than their day-to-day work. And it gives them a little bit of a breath to work on something that is new. You learn something new through this capacity building, for example. You do something that is fulfilling in terms of humanity. You're really helping someone and you see that impact directly. A third group is this new generation of lawyers, these new professionals. They just assume, if the old one would enter the legal profession because it's a very financially stable job to enter with. I think the new generation, Victoria, you're one of them, they enter the legal profession because they care, they want to do good. And even if they want to, join a big corporate law firms, they expect and they want them to do pro bono, and they would ask that at their interview, what are you doing on pro bono? Because I want to be involved with that. So this is actually a demand of this new generation of lawyers. And so this is really going to be a game changer because it's not something I have to do anymore. It's not something I do because I want to change a bit. Instead of doing tax law, this is something they want to do from the beginning. And this is also where I think professional figure like pro bono professionals is starting to emerge even more, because there's the realization that this can also be a profession. You can do good and be good at the same time.
So thank you very much, Özgür, to be with us today. At first, could you introduce yourself?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Özgür Kahale. I'm the Director of Pro Bono for Continental Europe for DLA Piper, and I'm based in our Paris office. And I've been doing this job for the last 8 years, so you can call me an experienced pro bono director, actually. I'm the first lawyer who was hired as a pro bono director in Europe, and the longest serving one. So therefore, I am happy to be on this podcast to share my experience with you and discuss pro bono in Europe. So thanks again for having me.
Thanks a lot to take part in this project, in this podcast. We'll come back later to the idea of working directly on pro bono and being a director pro bono. But we wanted to talk a bit more at the beginning about the pro bono trends in France that is relatively young, and it's still difficult to understand because there are many forms of pro bono in the world, and it's starting in France also. So what does pro bono consist of, and what is, according to you, the evolution of the practice of pro bono in France?
Yes, so every law firm has a definition of pro bono. They have their pro bono policy and manual. And then in this policy, they define what they count as pro bono. In our pro bono definition, we see pro bono as the skills-based volunteering. So you need to use your skills as a lawyer to volunteer, to do good, to give back to the society. And anything that doesn't fall under the skills-based volunteering category falls under community engagement for us. Meaning, if you'd like to go with your team and paint the walls of an orphanage, that's not pro bono, but that's community engagement. And this definition is really strictly applied in the US because the US firms kind of have a longer tradition of pro bono, doing pro bono. Therefore, they defined this a long time ago and applied it consistently. We are encouraging lawyers to use their expertise and skills to give back to the society, because only lawyers can help in certain situations. We think that it's more productive and valuable.
Thank you. That is really interesting. And you are the initiator of the European Pro Bono Initiative. What is it about and how does this project emerge?
Yes, so in the US, there is a group of lawyers who manage pro bono for big international law firms. They have their association. It's called APCO. And then recently in the UK, they also set up a group called UK Collaborative Plan. So it's made up of pro bono managers managing pro bono in the UK for international law firms, or for all law firms actually. And I wanted to bring it to the continent, basically, because in the continent, yes, when I started my job 8 years ago, I was the only pro bono professional working full-time for a law firm. But now it has changed since then. So there are more and more pro bono professionals in Europe. And I wanted to give them a forum to get together and talk to each other and talk only about pro bono in Europe, in the continent, free from the constraints in the UK or the US. Run our own discussions, talk about our challenges in the continent, or talk about the issues, how to grow pro bono in Europe, basically. So our mission is exactly that, to contribute to the growth of pro bono in Europe and understand how is it that we can do to make sure there are more and more pro bono professionals in Europe employed by law firms, and making sure, pro bono is understood and grows in Europe.
So this is a collective of firms in Europe, but how do you organize the work and the pro bono practice with the NGOs, with the citizens, and how do you choose the topics that you would work on?
In DLA, where I manage the pro bono practice, it is entirely up to me to shape the pro bono practice in Europe. Basically, I analyze the issues that we are grappling with in Europe and then how pro bono can respond to that. That's my job, to set the strategy. But of course, we have an international pro bono strategy as well. We have focus areas that are determined by all the pro bono managers managing different regions for DLA Piper. So we have a pro bono director in Europe, in the UK, I'm for Europe. We have Asia Pacific and Middle East and Africa. And we have our pro bono partners. So we get together, we talk about our strategy, international strategy. And then it is my job to implement this strategy in Europe, but also keep in mind what is it that Europe needs, and then feed it back into the international strategy. So in deciding that, And that is why the European Pro Bono Initiative is important and helpful to have. I brainstorm with my colleagues working for other law firms. What do we want to do in Europe? What are the issues? Access to justice issues in Europe for people. And, by answering these questions, we arrive at what is it that we want to do or we need to do. And it's not always that we go and find the topic. Sometimes the topic finds us. For example, the war in Ukraine. I mean, it's obvious. What do? We respond to the need and, do projects around it. So, or before that it was Afghanistan, before that it was Syria. I mean, we are a little bit trying to grapple with emergency response and also taking active action, because taking active action will require thinking about the future. What is it that is not happening now and that we want it to happen in the future?
Thank you. So, do you think that clearinghouse have a role to play in including in-house counsel in the pro bono practice?
Yes, absolutely. So the clearinghouses are really, really important in the growth of pro bono in Europe and spreading the word, gathering the community and reaching out to NGOs, because law firms have their NGO connections and clientele when they do pro bono. So I have some, people that I know, they reach out to me directly, but I will never be able to reach out to as many people as the clearinghouses would be able to reach out to, like your contacts. I would never have your Rolex. But with the presence of clearinghouses, it becomes a real offering. It becomes something easy to access. And only for that reason we would have supported the clearinghouses, but there is more. So the clearinghouses, first of all, you reach out to many NGOs, but then you reach out to many law firms as well. So you create a community of law firms who are working, wanting to do pro bono, and you bring us together to see what the others are doing. If it weren't for you, we would have to call each other or gather through the European Pro Bono Initiative, but clearinghouses are usually doing this locally, so I wouldn't know what the other French law firms are doing on pro bono if it weren't for you. It would be impossible for me to find out about every country.
But one of the aspects of probably the future of pro bono is the involvement of companies. Do you see a role there, since the law firms have really close relationships with the companies, of course? And the second thing would be on a different matter, but the companies are also providing some tools, some solutions regarding, for example, the brokering of requests. So how do you see this new evolution, the challenges that it may create in the future?
Okay, so let's start with the first question, whether clearinghouses should work with companies or could work, or how could they work together. I think it's really important for clearinghouses to work with in-house counsels, because as almost all law firms, international law firms, have pro bono professionals like me. That's our full-time job. We find matters, we run projects. But very, very few companies, maybe like one or two that I know of, have a pro bono manager, full-time pro bono professional. So they need you more than we need you, actually. Because they always, I have a lot of clients who are knocking on my door saying that, well, do you have pro bono opportunities? Can we work with you? That is because they don't have the time or a person resource to go and find projects for them. So they rely on law firms to do that. And law firms are always happy to work with them, because that's always an added benefit to us. We get closer to our clients, we give them value-added services, and it's kind of like a good thing for us to do. But it's sometimes difficult to meet their needs, because I have one project, there are 4 clients, which one do I give it to? How do I, do it? But whereas if you were to develop them, if you could really give them a lot of opportunities and meet their demand, because there's a lot of demand from the in-house counsels now. They see the legal counsels, law firms doing pro bono, they'd like to do the same, but they don't have the resources. So they really need you. And if you could involve them in this environment, in this climate, it would only enrich the pro bono atmosphere. It would make it, bigger. The bigger we are, stronger we'll become. The second question, Yes, there are a lot of technology companies or small, I wouldn't call them technology companies, but there are a lot of tech offers out there to create platforms, matchmaking platforms for pro bono to connect the demand with the offer. And I fully support these kinds of efforts. First of all, I am leading a stream of work in DLA Piper called Access to Justice and Technology. So that's about thinking about how we use technology in order to improve pro bono, our pro bono offer, and support people access their rights. And I think technology has great promises for the future of the legal profession and also for pro bono and also for individuals in the legal field. There will be issues. There are people think that there might be issues about data protection or privacy and stuff, but I don't think these issues are big to prevent these things from happening. Data protection is almost for me an intuitive thing, meaning in real life, you would be careful about what you tell to who and, where you leave your contact details and stuff. You do the same online. And then the person who's responsible ensures that it's stored in a safe place. And once these conditions are met, I think there is great, benefits in investing into this kind of structure, because a lot of things now happen online. So, and new generation and people are more and more used to doing things online and going through the platforms. And this is where things are evolving, and we wouldn't want to stay behind. We'd like to harvest the potential of connecting better, working more closely, and streamlining things, really, making sure the connections are made, information flows more smoothly, fast, more transparently. All these things are for our benefit.
Why do you think the lawyers actually get involved in pro bono?
First it's the ethical responsibility of the profession, of course. Lawyers, we give back to the society through doing that. If you're a doctor, somebody's having a heart attack on the street, you don't go and tell them, look, can you pay me? I'll treat you if you can pay me. You don't do that. You just, help the person. And it's in the same vein, lawyers, if there is urgent need, they go and help out. But there are more reasons. It's not the only reason. The second one is reputation, of course. It's good for our reputation. It's good for our name. It's third reason, the clients demand it. In the pitch documents, they ask us how many hours of pro bono we've done. That's one of the criterions for them to engage outside counsel nowadays, with the ESG, with they question responsible business, what it means to be a responsible business. They demand that we do pro bono. Fourth reason, it's an integration tool for us. We are a large law firm. By doing pro bono, our lawyers get together. So, it's good for our firm, for our lawyers to get to know each other. This is a tool for us. It's a professional development opportunity for our lawyers. You can be a tax lawyer, but you will have an opportunity to work on refugee rights. Then it makes you a better lawyer because you get to know more about law than only tax law. You become a holistic lawyer, basically. New generation of lawyers demand it when we want to hire people. For example, when we talk to them about pro bono practice, they say, wow, it's impressive. Okay, I'm going to choose DLA Piper over a small law firm with no pro bono practice, for example. So there are lots of reasons why we do pro bono.
So you talked earlier about the different crises that happened in the past and about the way law firms could actually respond to this crisis. It's sometimes a bit difficult to understand what the law firms can do when a crisis is happening on the other side of the world. So how do law firms actually respond to this kind of crisis?
So law firms are really sensitive to those kinds of crises. Actually, for example, when the war started in Ukraine, we immediately started organizing calls amongst each other. We set up a Google emailing list and started sharing the projects we're doing. And, in order to invite each other to our others' projects. So we're really trying to understand who is doing what so that we can support each other and not do the same thing. For example, one project we've set up is the Ukrainian help sheets projects. We're doing this with PILnet. We've prepared help sheets for every country in Europe in order to explain the Ukrainians on the move what their rights in those countries. So if you're coming to France, in the France help sheet, you can read about how you can register your kids in school, how you can apply for housing, how you can get the temporary protection status. All these, information is given to you for all over Europe. We've prepared those help sheets in the countries where we have offices and invited other law firms to prepare the same in the countries where we don't have offices. And, many of them joined us. Or another law firm is preparing a project on sanctions and we've contributed to their project. There's a lot of collaborative initiatives are going on between law firms in the pro bono, thanks to the pro bono space, thanks to the pro bono practices, because they are organized through the pro bono managers working for international law firms, which are geared towards responding to a particular humanitarian crisis. So that was about Ukraine, for example. Before that, there was Afghanistan crisis. We've set up a project, and you were involved as well in France, family reunification for Afghans. It's a collaborative project of a lot of international law firms as well. I think it's more and more collaborative projects are happening because we're gaining experience about how to set them up and how to collaborate better and to see if our impact is bigger when we collaborate.
So collective support is growing between law firms. How do you see the pro bono landscape in the future?
I see it's only going to get bigger. It will change actually a little bit because the context of responsible business is changing. So I started my career as a project finance lawyer in London. Then I quit that to do a master's and a PhD. In my PhD, I talked about business and human rights. It was actually corporate social responsibility when I started. That's how we called it. After it became business and human rights when I was writing my PhD, now it became ESG. So the name we are giving it is changing. And with the name, the expectations and the understanding of this thing is changing. And what is this thing? This thing means how should companies behave in the world? Because before they thought that they existed only to make money, but now they are questioning their existence and they understand and know that they need to be responsible citizens, meaning they cannot make money at the expense of destroying the natural resources or, at the expense of climate change or at the expense of, people. So they are, when they question their existence, they are changing the way they behave. So it's becoming a little bit more integrated in their personality to become responsible citizens. Pro bono is a part of being a responsible citizen. Therefore, before it was just an add-on or like a nice thing to do, at the moment it's becoming a part of what they are, what they do. It's becoming normal. It's like, of course we will have to do this. Of course it is given, it's natural, it's a part of our identity. So when I said growth, I was referring to that. So it's going to grow, meaning it's going to become part of normal life. It's not going to go away, but it's going to change in the way that, yes, it will become a part of all the law firms, all the businesses. But what happens after that? Is it going to take more space? Is it going to integrate with the business or integrate with the way businesses are run? Yeah, I don't know how it's going to take. Is it going to be called even pro bono in the future? Or is it going to be just something the law firms do? You know what I mean? Because we call it pro bono at the moment in order to differentiate it from something, which is the normal is to give legal advice and get money. So from the commercial work. But maybe in the future, there will be a difference between commercial work and, free work. I don't know. I'm just, throwing things out there. Of course, you'll have to make money, but that's what I'm trying to get at, if you know what I mean. It will become a part of it even more so than now, and it'll become normalized.
So you won't have to be a pro bono director anymore.
Yes, that's my job actually. My thinking always in my job is that what can I do in order so that we don't need pro bono directors in the future?
And why did you basically become the pro bono director, and what does it mean to you now?
Good question. So the answer is funny. So I did my PhD. It was on international investment and how to protect human rights while, doing investment projects. After my PhD, I really enjoyed it. I loved thinking and writing about this topic, business and human rights, responsible business. What is it that the companies need to do to protect human rights? And I looked at my options. I didn't want to go back to commercial law, to project finance. I looked at my options. I said, okay, I don't want to work for an NGO. I don't want to work for the UN. I don't want to teach in a university. I didn't have many options there. So I said, well, I would like to work with in a law firm because I really like the environment in the law firm. It's professional. It's fast-paced. There's pressure. I like the pressure. I'm just kind of one of those people who perform better under pressure, when there's a deadline, when it's go, and I feel more alive by that. So I said, I want to work for a law firm, but I didn't know that at that time, I knew there were pro bono jobs in the UK, but I was based in Paris. I didn't know that I could find a full-time pro bono job in Europe. But I started searching, and then when I came across this opportunity with DLA, I thought, oh my God, they are looking for me because of all the things that I could, contribute to by way of having worked with a law firm in the past, by way of having done research on those topics and thought about this, and also my multicultural background. So I was born and raised in Turkey, studied in England. I speak a bit of French, not amazing, but I get by. So I speak 3 languages, lived in different countries in the world and stuff. I thought, my profile fit their needs for what they expect from an European pro bono manager. And it was mutual, thankfully, our feelings, and they employed me. And since then, I didn't look back. I really, really enjoyed this job, contributed so much to my personal and professional growth, because it's not a job you're not a lawyer only. You are, one day you're a marketing person, the other day communications person, the next day you are a project manager. So it involves a lot of, skills. You need to make do with what you have. You need to create solutions. You need to always think on the go and take action. It suited my personality, which seeks thrill. So I am super happy to have found this job, and I've been happily doing it since then.
Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure to have you and to hear about your thoughts on the pro bono practice in France, but also more globally speaking widely. So thank you. Thanks you very much.
I thank you.
Thank you for listening to this podcast on the practice of pro bono. We would like to thank Mrs. Özgür Kahale and Mrs. Giulia Patane for their participation.
You can find more information about the speakers in the description of this episode. Feel free to follow us on our Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And see you soon for a new episode.